This is an important message about our city's budget, and I urge you to listen on till the end. This year's budget process has been an insult to the people of Oakland. I made the deep mistake of putting my trust in the mayor and city administrator in their strong belief that the sale of the Coliseum would happen in time before our budget was passed. 3 days before we were set to vote on the budget last week, we received information that the sale of the Coliseum deal would in fact not go through in time before the budget was passed. So to me, it was a wildly impossible choice to use money from sale of the Coliseum when we don't even know when the sale of the Coliseum deal is even going to be finalized. I was absolutely shocked on Friday to hear that most of my colleagues on Oakland City Council were actually ready to use money for our budget this year that we do not yet have, money from the sale of the Coliseum, when we have no idea if and when it will go through and how much money the city would actually get. I refuse to be gaslit any longer on the state of our city's real finances, and I urge you to listen to the speech that I made at the council meeting last Friday, where I explain why I think this would be an incredibly irresponsible choice for our city. All right, good afternoon. Today I'm going to present on one key aspect of what's facing us today, the irresponsible choice facing Oakland City Council today. There is no doubt that we have a number of difficult choices and painful cuts regardless that we have to make. But there's one option in front of us today that, in my opinion, cannot be considered a real option because it will lead to years of financial ruin for this city and threats to millions of dollars of existing funding that support our basic city services. So frankly speaking, this budget process is an insult to the people of Oakland. The proceeds from the sale of the Coliseum should never have been incorporated into this budget from the start. And let me be clear. Thank you. I wholeheartedly support the sale of the Coliseum to AASCG, and I voted for it proudly. But I did make the deep mistake of putting my trust in our mayor and city administration that this deal would go through in time to use for this year's fiscal budget, and I regret that level of trust that I placed in them. It is now crystal clear, as confirmed by our staff this afternoon, an hour or two ago, and I quote, "We simply do not know when this incredibly complex deal will be finalized." And I am deeply disappointed in the choice to even consider using Coliseum sale proceeds in the originally submitted budget, given that others in the city did know the realities of what we're facing in our state of negotiations before we did. Not speaking for all council members, of course, but I only received information of this new proposed budget and information on the lack of viability of the Coliseum deal being finalized in time at the same time that the public did, this Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before today's budget meeting, in what only appears to be an effort to tie the hands of council and steamroll us into an irresponsible vote. We were presented at the 11th hour with an impossible choice. One budget option that speaks against the values of the majority of Oaklanders to prioritize public safety, and the other that is a wildly irresponsible and utterly practical choice, and I'm about to briefly explain why. So firstly, what do we risk from using Coliseum funds in this year's budget? You heard from our finance director deep concerns about our bond rating going down, that it is very likely that our credit rating would decrease. Why? Because we must disclose publicly in an incredibly risky decision that we're making to use $63 million that we don't yet have and we don't know when we are going to get. I quote Director Roseman saying that it takes a while to build that good credit rating, but it is very quick to be knocked down. So what are the other consequences? That bond downgrade and other factors means that creditors don't want to lend to us because we will be perceived as a city less trustworthy and not worth the risk. We will be charged
exorbitantly higher interest rates if creditors want to lend to us at all. We will be effectively blocked from accessing the capital market. We can't float bonds to fund our capital programs. That means millions of dollars of our capital budget, over $200 million that is currently slated to go into affordable housing projects, infrastructure, and improving city facilities. What else is at stake? Matching funds that could come from the state. We regularly talk about on this dais how we need more federal and state and dollars coming into this city. Yet we are threatening that opportunity to get outside money coming in by decisions like this that threaten our capital program, and therefore threaten matching funding. What else is at risk? If we don't get this initial tranche, an installment payment of $15 million that's right now slated in this option one, we have to, quote, put the brakes on our spending. And it's going to lead to a worse situation than is before you being proposed right now. You heard an hour or two ago Mr. Johnson present what is at stake if we don't get this revenue by September 1st, and we cannot assume in any rational mind that we will get this money by September 1st, $15 million. What's at stake? Everyone's concerned that we're going to go down to 610 officers, but we will then go down to 600. We're concerned now that one proposed budget would lead to 4 brownouts of fire stations, but if this money doesn't come in on time, we will go to 5 brownouts of fire station. What else is at stake? The freezing of Department of Violence Prevention ceasefire positions rather than delayed hire, eliminating vacant positions rather than just delaying them. Let's talk about contracts. We know very well what's going on with the state of city contracts not being given to individuals and organizations on time. We know festivals like Art and Soul just got canceled because despite having approval from the city council, a contract was not executed and money didn't go out the door to over 40 different arts and cultural organizations. What will happen if we don't get $15 million from the proceeds of this deal by September 1st? None of these organizations promised contracts by a city will get them for the foreseeable future. We are putting the brakes on absolutely everything if and when we don't get this money. Contracts for violence prevention, contracts for paving, so much more will be impacted if we get into this dreaded contingency situation. So you might ask, well, why don't we just modify our budget later if we get the money? And then we can go back to, if we don't get the money in September, why can't we just go back to where we are right now? The answer is we have already destroyed our reputation and have presented ourselves publicly as fiscally irresponsible, saying that we said we'd get $15 million when we don't, and therefore the creditor world sees us as untrustworthy and unlikely to get the rest of that $105 million that we're supposed to get from sale of the Coliseum. And once again, I quote Director Roseman from an hour ago, when we are in a reactive mode, it impacts our ability to access the bond market. If we have to walk back our budget and address contingencies, it makes it difficult to implement what we're doing because we made a more risky decision. Even though the alternative in front of us today is drastic and acceptable in its own way, expect far more drastic and unacceptable cuts come September if this option one is presented. So I submitted 2 different rounds of amendments to the originally proposed budget. One jointly with Councilmember Reed and Councilmember Gallo that prioritize public safety. I won't spend time explaining right now the details of them today since we did present a PowerPoint and a video at the last budget meeting, which is all published on Legistar, along with a budget spreadsheet with expenditures and correlating reductions. But just to be clear, the priorities in these budget amendments continue to be exactly for what we're advocating today. Funding civilian OPD positions and avoiding drastic officer cuts, funding grant writing positions in the fire department, fire inspectors, and avoiding brownouts, and of course, our plan for having a comprehensive East Oakland Community Safety Ambassador program in the Diamond and Laurel, in Hagenberger, and in Fruitvale. So the bottom line is none of these budgets in front of us is in line with our values today, and no one is tying our hands to pass either one today. Everything that I've shared in this presentation so far is based on 3 days of analysis, and my amendments would have been vastly different had I known the realities of the negotiation status of this deal and had I known the truth. Getting this information at the 11th hour is a blow to the people's trust in this city and, frankly, my own trust in this city. I have no doubt that painful cuts are gonna have to be made from a lot of places, but they do not have to be the cuts proposed to us today, and legally don't have to be voted on today or Tuesday. So what should we do instead? With 3 days to review this new budget, and in my perspective, the only viable budget proposal, yet an 8-day process to work through and submit amendments as council members with our finance team, there's no possible way to get any amendments in by Tuesday. So instead, here is a proposed schedule to get to a rational budget vote. Firstly, directing the city administrator to take all actions needed to extend this process by another month, using next Tuesday's council meeting on July 2nd to hold a study session on the proposed alternatives with each and every department head explaining this new proposed budget and other potential cuts. Then the following week, hosting a combined all-council budget town hall with a comprehensive window for community feedback, then providing council members with a 1-week window to consult with finance and publish amendments, and then finally in the final week of July to discuss and vote on these amendments. And once again, I'll just state that I do support the sale of the Coliseum to AASCG, and if funds do appear faster than we believe, it is perfectly reasonable and possible for council to open back our budgets and amend it when Coliseum sale comes in. It is always more responsible to add money once we get it in later than assume we have money that we don't. So in conclusion, I urge my fellow council members here today, through their votes, to tell the world that the buck stops here with Oakland's history of poor fiscal planning and a lack of transparency. Because choosing the irresponsible option threatens $200 million of capital investments into affordable housing, public safety, and infrastructure. And because money from this deal simply will not reach city coffers by September 1st, the irresponsible choice means that we will face even lower numbers of officers than what's proposed now, more brownouts, contracts being frozen, and so much more. We do not deserve any more gaslighting on our city's fiscal realities than what we have already endured. We cannot allow ourselves to be a scapegoat for self-serving policy and planning decisions of others. We cannot let the promise of pretty shiny objects cloud the reality of what we are facing. And I personally refuse to kick the can down the road and let future councils deal with the same problems we're facing today. So I invite my colleagues to join me in doing the same. But if their refusal means that I once again stand alone in my beliefs or stand with the minority, I am not afraid to do so once again. So I for one will continue to be here on this dais, hopefully for years to come, and I will not be part of any budget decision that allows our city to fall into financial destruction. Thank you.